Hello from the damp, wrung-out rag formerly known as Jane Perrone, and welcome to On the Ledge podcast. There's been a heat wave here in the UK this week. It's got very hot, and as a result of that, I hope some people are a little bit more aware about the risks of climate change. It wasn't great here in the UK, but I know that lots of people in other parts of the world are suffering way more. So yeah, climate change is real, people. Go and read the climate change science, and let's get angry about this stuff, because we need change on a governmental and a personal level. But I also know that we all need some downtime and some time to relax and enjoy ourselves. And that's where On the Ledge and Houseplants come in. So welcome to the show. In this week's episode, I'm playing you the recording of my live podcast recorded at the Hampton Court Palace Garden Festival Flowers After Hours event with my guest, the delightful Gynelle Leon. And I'm also answering a question about mystery drops on a philodendron. A humongous, enormous, ginormous thank you to Dean, Kathleen and Bingle Bangle, who became legends joining my Patreon clan, and also to Frank, who became a superfan. Thank you so much to all of you for putting your money where your mouth is in supporting On the Ledge. If you want to find out more about Patreon, check out the show notes, where you'll also find info on how you can support the show in other ways. And those of you who are patrons, remember the Patreon survey that I'm running. You've got until end of play, British summertime, 11:59 p.m. British summertime on the 24th. That's this Sunday the 24th of July 2022, to fill that out. I want to hear all the criticism, good, bad, ugly. Fill that out, and if you add your email address, you will be in with a chance of getting a swag bag of On the Ledge merch. Final reminder, next week's show will be the last show for a few weeks. I'm taking August off the podcast, and I'll be starting up again on September the 2nd. Patreon subscriptions will be paused. I'll still be putting out briefer editions of my newsletter on the UK houseplant scene, The Plant Ledger. So if you haven't signed up for that, do go and check the show notes for a link for that. It comes out every other Friday and is packed full of information about everything that's happening in the UK to do with houseplants. Hello. I've always wanted to say this. Good evening, Hampton Court. Thank you for joining me and the wonderful Gynelle Leon. I guess I'll introduce myself first. I'm Jane Perrone. I'm the host of Houseplant podcast On the Ledge. I want to say the first Houseplant podcast. Yeah, I want to say I was first. I think I was. And I'm joined by Gynelle Leon, who's the owner of the wonderfully named Prick, London's first cactus and succulent shop. So I'm really delighted to be here because I really love houseplants. And if you're not familiar with On the Ledge, the show started because basically my family was sick of me talking about houseplants all the time. I don't know if you get this, Gynelle. Yeah. So I just thought, I'm going to start a podcast, because then I can actually have somebody to just babble onto about this stuff that I'm really fascinated by. And that was back in 2017 the podcast started. I think it was the year after your shop opened.
Yeah, it was.
2016. Yeah. So there was something going on in the water then, I think. I mean, at that time, not many people knew what a podcast was at that point. But
as a self-obsessed journalist with inflated sense of my own self-worth, of course, what could I do other than start a podcast? And then 200 odd episodes and a global pandemic later, it turns out the houseplants are actually quite popular now.
Yeah.
And you've been a real trailblazer in this industry. One newspaper described your shop as a cavern of cacti, which I absolutely love, and indeed it is. You've written 2 books about houseplants, and you've got a column in The Guardian. I read somewhere that you've also got an MSc in forensic science. I need to hear more about that later. But let's start by talking about Prick. What was it that made you decide to switch gears and switch careers and open a cactus shop?
I think I always thought I was going to be a florist, but I always thought it was going to happen when I was 40. I don't know, when you're young... When you're young, 40 sounds like this old age when I've got everything sorted in my life. Little did I know. It's not how it works out. So I had this thing in the future, this is my dream. And then I basically got dumped. I got dumped many times in my 20s. I was a serial dater and I believed everybody was the one. And then the last one that dumped me, I was like... He was a musician and he travelled the world and he moved to New York. And I was like, do you know what? He's doing whatever the hell he wants. Why don't I start thinking about if there was anything I could do? Why don't I just do this florist now? So I went into it thinking I was going to own a florist, but it was only because of working in a florist, seeing how hard it is. Such hard work, physically, labour intensive. I don't do mornings. All these things I realised they didn't actually suit me. I also had a growing houseplant collection, especially cacti and succulents, and I was really sick of having to drive to Chelsea go to Chelsea once a year, or drive for 4 hours up to Lincolnshire to cactus land to get my plants. I just went online to Google to find somewhere in London, and there was nowhere. And I kind of just thought, well, why isn't there? There's thousands of succulent species. Why isn't there somewhere dedicated to just these incredible, loyal, hardy, enduring plants? They suited my lifestyle perfectly. And that's when I kind of changed route. And I was like, no, I need to open that cactus shop, and I'm going to call it Prick. And it was just a thought like that. And I said it to people, and then everybody was like, that's genius. I think it was more the name that everyone was like, that's genius. They weren't really into plants yet. I say yet because everybody I know is into them now. But yeah, at the time, everyone was just like, yeah, it's perfect.
I mean, the name is brilliant because it's entirely accurate, but it's also a little bit provocative. Talking about cacti and succulents, you're right, they are easy, but I do see a lot of listeners who send me pictures of things that have turned to mush and things that have wizened because they've literally thought, it's a desert plant, I don't need to water it. Yeah. So when, somebody's coming to your shop and buying a cactus and they really, clearly, this is their first purchase, what are the things that you want to be ringing in their ears as they leave that shop?
I think with all houseplants that we're buying, we have to think about what their natural habitat's like and then emulate that at home. So with cacti and succulents, although yes, they are in arid environments, it does rain. It does rain in those places. It's just the fact that when it does rain, it's a heavy downpour. They soak up as much as they can in their fleshy leaves or in their stem, and that's what allows them to keep going. There is some water in there, whereas I think there's a big misconception where it's they don't need water. It's the fact that they do need it, but they're able to store it if you water it liberally at a time. So I think that's the number one thing where it's they do need actually care and water, and they need quite a lot of sunlight. So I think, as with all ornamental plants, we've got them in our homes to make it look good, but I think that then people place them in areas that look good rather than thinking about what the plant needs. So if we think about care first, okay, so this needs sunlight, don't put it on your mantelpiece because there's nothing there. There's an empty zone. You want to put it where it's getting sunlight and it's getting enough light. So with cacti and succulents, it's usually full exposure, except that you do have some if you see the hanging plants like Ripsalis, they usually want a little bit less. They can be scorched because they're used to getting some shade. But yeah, usually it's that, and then you want to have free draining soil. So you have lots of people put a plant in a lovely pot, doesn't have any drainage hole. They'll put it straight in there, nothing at the bottom, because it looks nice, and that's the thing, the aesthetic side of it. But then they'll water too much, and it will fill up like a bath, and then and then it's all soft and mushy, and that's the rot. So it's usually either they are rotting it or they're killing it with kindness. Every time they see the plant, they're like, oh, let me give it a bit more water and a little bit more water, like every time they see it, rather than kind of having a schedule in their mind of like, okay, I watered that a week ago or 2 weeks ago, let's check the soil first. We want to make sure that dries out completely. And the other thing with succulents is that you want to give it a season. As we were saying, in the arid environment, there are times of the year where they won't get much water and they're used to going dormant and they need that rest. So it's like choosing that season's probably about October through to March, and it depends because our seasons are now shifting so much where you can get really hot days in October sometimes. So it's kind of just seeing what our environment's saying as it's getting cooler, as we're getting more rainfall, kind of then switching over to, especially with cacti, not watering. But then we have to also be aware that we've got them in our homes where we've got central heating, which they wouldn't usually have out in the wild. So it's kind of making little adjustments, but it's just mainly just knowing the care for the plant, for what it's used to, and then just emulating that at home.
People love to put plants on a mantelpiece, don't they? And really, there's not that many plants, unless you've got a really, I mean, mantelpieces are usually away from the window, like there's not that many houseplants that are going to do well there unless you've got them under a grow light. But I mean, they do look good. I understand why people do it, but and I mean, succulents are really tough. I had a colleague at work who, had a ripsalis on her desk, and honest to God, I don't think she ever touched it or watered it, and it just looked exactly. It didn't grow, but it looked exactly the same. So these plants are really, really tough. I know this is like choosing like a favourite child, but can you pick out a particular cactus or succulent that really makes you your heart sing? Is there something you really wouldn't want to live without?
I'm between two.
Okay, you can have two. I'm going
to go two because one's a succulent, one's a cactus.
Okay, so that's fair.
I would say genus-wise, it will be like euphorbia succulents because they are so diverse in how they look. You'd see two different ones, like the Iobessa. If you have the Iobessa next to like the Ingens, you'd never think they were in the same family because they look so different. And I do love them for that. I don't love them for the sap, but I do love them.
The sap. We must mention the euphorbia sap, because I don't know what it is with euphorbias, but I have heard a few horror stories of gardeners, growers with euphorbia sap. I think particularly where it's warm and you're in a greenhouse and you cut a euphorbia and this milky sap kind of turns into an aerosol in the air and gets you in the eye. It's actually really, really horrible. So you do have to be really careful with those plants. And a lot of people don't realise, and there's always sort of horror stories of, people realising. And it's made worse by exposure to the sun, obviously. So if you're in you go outside and you've got some sap on you, and then it's not funny. So just be careful with your euphorbias is all I would say. But they are an amazing, amazing family of plants. Obviously lots of garden plants that are euphorbias too. I really love, if I can just, before you tell me your cactus, just say I love Euphorbia obesa. I think one of the names is the tartan golf ball or something like that.
I've heard basketball cactus, which is wrong anyway. They call it basketball cactus, but I've not heard the but it does make sense.
I'm feeling a bit sensitive about that plant right now because my husband, I did a beautiful terracotta dish of succulents to take to his office. This was pre-COVID. He's just brought it home. And he hasn't been in his office for quite a long time, and it was just the saddest sight. Oh my gosh, this Euphorbia obesa had just crunched in on itself in this really dismal way, and somehow had mealybugs as well. So that was great. But anyway, let's talk about cactus choices.
Cactus, it has to be the mammillaria because I mean, there's such an easy one to flower. I feel that's like one thing that's really lovely about many of the species. And also, I think there's just something so otherworldly, the kind of, how they kind of clone and make these massive clumps, and, you've got ones that can help. I think they're gorgeous. So I think that would definitely be my cactus,
I think the thing with cacti is that the flowers, people don't really realise just how amazing the flowers are until you go to a show like this and you see some of the cactus stands just absolutely those mammillaria, just a huge mound covered in these amazing neon flowers, which are just absolutely stunning. And that's a really good reason to grow them. They are absolutely gorgeous. There aren't that many scented cacti, but I love, have you ever smelt the flowers of the Easter lily cactus? Those big white flowers. They smell like Persil.
Really?
They smell like Persil laundry powder. I'm not kidding you. They're amazing. So if you like the smell of that, which I happen to do, that's a good one. That's a good one. We must touch on a subject, though, which is potentially... Is it controversial? I don't know. But the world of houseplants is full of women, which is great and delightful. But the world of cactus collecting is a little bit male.
And old.
And the older generation as well. How do you feel being the younger guard of the cactus world?
I mean, I've got lots of old man friends.
Yay!
I've always... it is really interesting because I think the first time I went to a BCSS, so British Cactus and Succulent Society meeting, I walked in and everyone was like, are you in the right place? And I was like, yeah, definitely. And I was the youngest by... several decades. Like, I think, the next person up for me was 60-something years old. So, but it was really lovely because in that sense, it's you've got this lovely community of people who can, look after you. But then at the same time, it's kind of credibility had to be gained because it's kind of well, you're so young. How could you know anything about these? Compared to us, I've been doing this for 40-odd years. So it was it's hard going into any industry as a fresh person, let alone completely different to the rest of the demographic. But I always see everything as a challenge. I love these things, these plants, because I generally do have a passion for it. It's not a fad or anything like that. And I think that's been felt by the community, and so it's just really nice that they embraced me and helped me learn so much about them.
Awesome. Well, I'm just being slightly distracted by the jazz music we're experiencing over here. It sounds a little bit like the opening theme music for my podcast, so I'm all up for it. But there's a massive sousaphone over there. What else can I say? One of the things I love about houseplants is that I think it's a really interesting combination of art and science. There's not many things in life where you're worrying about the aesthetics of the pot and you're also looking at the incredible botany of these plants. Does your forensic science background, does this come into your work at all? I want to know whether you're I don't know, what are you doing that makes that MSc all feel worthwhile?
Nothing. I'm not dissecting any plants. I think that basically it's quite funny because when I went to uni, I did my first degree in anatomy, and I actually did it because I said I don't want to do biology because I don't want to study plants. And it's because obviously now I'm in love with them. But then at the time, I think I came out of school and I was just no plants. I just want humans, and that's it, really. But I think that with the MSc, I think it teaches you to research. I'm very good and helped with the books, definitely. So being able to research integrity, being able to follow a process. So I think all of those things are so important in running a business. I don't know if it's applicable for plant business, but I feel the skills that I gained during that was mostly being able to write really well, being able to really look for facts, instead of just grabbing things off of Google or whatever, being able to sit down and read and then compile a report or an article or a chapter in a book. So I think definitely that's the transferable part there. The rest of it, no. It was just a lot of fun. I think there were things I did expert witness, so you go to court, you get trained by barristers to go under pressure, so they completely try to break you down, and then they film it and they show you all the things your weird quirks or where you go wrong. And I think that's something that in life has taught me so much, because I feel I can kind of enjoy, if anyone's going to try and break, I kind of hold my steadfast. So I think there's a lot of transferable things in there, but in general it was a really enjoyable time.
I'm not going to break you tonight, Gynelle, with any of my questions, clearly. I've got a degree in English literature, which was, for my current job, not at all relevant. I just love books, and It was a great degree, but
for journalism,
not that relatable. I spent a lot of times reading Dickens novels.
Okay.
I mean, it was nice, but it wasn't that relevant. I mean, I wonder whether younger generations are sort of steered away from thinking about studying horticulture and botany, and not. I mean, I certainly wasn't. I was really into plants as a kid, but I never considered doing that as a degree course or anything. It just never entered my mind. I don't know whether it's that it's just not seen as being prestigious enough, or that I don't know what the reason is, but we need more young people getting into this world. So let's hope that changes.
Yeah, in school I never even knew of like horticulture as a whole industry at all. I know you had like farmers, that was it. I didn't ever think there's anything else that goes on. So I think I always loved flowers, but I never saw any other way to do it. So I think it would be great for the next generation just to be aware of these things, and also like being able to open it up to like not being just for a certain class of people, so just being everybody can do these jobs.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a stereotype that if you get into horticulture you're pushing a mower, which is, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's so much wider than that, and there's so many other interesting careers out there, which I mean, I always say to my kids, when I was your age, my job didn't exist, so who knows what you're going to be up to. Now, you're obviously known for your cacti, but you've also written a book about houseplants, and you've got a houseplant column in The Guardian. I used to work for The Guardian, so I'm allowed to give them a plug. How do you're picking a houseplant every week to profile. Are you just going for your favourites, or have you got any other criteria that make a plant a good for inclusion in there?
I've got a few different things that I use. First of all, I kind of made a list of plants that I thought that were quite common ones that most people would have, and then I had some that were common and then people would struggle with. So I thought I'd do those so that they can go, oh,
can we say Calathea? Can we?
Yes. Everybody's like, oh, that's why it's not me. So that was the one thing that I do. I do also look for like trending plants. So I do look like online to see if there is, because you see like patterns online of people getting into them. And I use Google Trends as well. I like check and see what people are looking for. But yeah, and it's kind of just a mixture of that, or if it's like, a loved one of mine, but it's kind of a mixture of both. But it is, as the weeks get on, it's like, oh yeah, what is it going to be? But you never run out. There's thousands and thousands of plants. So it's really lovely, especially for me, if it is something that, a plant that I don't know much about, then being able to research myself. So I love writing every week. It forces me to like research and write every week, whereas before I'd always go, I'd love to write some bits, but when you haven't got a column which has to be in by a deadline, you kind of can leave it for months, or like, I haven't written since my last book kind of thing. So I think that's what's really great, just to be able to like tap into like, what is it that people don't know about? And I ask also my followers as well. I do ask sometimes like, what do you want me to write about? But almost always they say pests, and I'm like, that's not a plant. Like,
no. But we need to talk about Calatheas, because I mean, so many people buy these beautiful plants, from the DIY store or from a plant shop, and it doesn't go well. No. I mean, you do, like, I think Instagram is a bit deceptive, because you see this incredible plant on Instagram and you think, wow, I can do that. And then you realise that you can't.
No. No.
What is it about them that is hard, and what, how do you make them happy? Is it possible in a conventional home? I mean, I'm thinking that the only one that I recommend to people when they're saying, I've killed all the Calatheas, is Calathea Network. I think is one of the ones that does put up with normal room conditions without really sulking, which is that lovely one with the sort of network of like lime green and green leaves. That's the easiest as far as I'm concerned. But if someone tells me they've killed 10 Calatheas, I'm like, oh yeah,
just stop. I mean, I think, like, as you're saying with Instagram, also it's very difficult because you don't know what country they're in. So I feel like if you've got a higher like humidity, then you're probably making it a bit easier. And also you just have to have a lot of time, which I don't have, like to literally be constantly saying, are you okay? Are you okay? What else do you need? Do you need more humidity? What about your soil? oh, I can see you're about to crisp up right there. Like, it's just those leaves. Like, I don't understand how that you can keep them without having brown on some part of them.
Yeah, they do lend themselves to that, unless you're seeing them in a greenhouse. That is the trouble. What are the trendy plants that you're seeing? You know, you're looking at trends. What are there any particular trendy plants that you're noticing coming through? I mean, I'm thinking that Ripsalis seem to be having a big day right now.
Yeah, I think, like, I feel like now everybody's getting very much, like, because of social media, I think this as well, sizist. So anything that's going to grow massive, so they can say, look what I've done. So alocasias, so the huge alocasia, like any of those, there's so many different species. That's what I'm noticing a lot of. It's a lot of huge alocasia. And you've got the photos, so you've got the size aspect from, like, look how small I am compared to my large plant. So I feel like there's a lot in the plant world at the moment. It's a lot of, like, these kind of, like, I bought it here, like, you show the, like, beginning or, like, 5 years ago, and look at the monster here. And I think then people buy into it. Oh, I want to do that. Like, I want to see that success every day when I go into my front room. So I definitely think that at the moment is a big time for alocasias. Like, that's all the different species of those everybody's into. The larger the better.
Yeah, and again, not that easy. I mean,
no.
I think it always also depends on what kind of house you're living in. If you're living in, a place with only north-facing windows, then probably cacti are not going to work for you.
No.
I mean, do you get some customers coming in where you're just like, I can't help you, or you need to get grow lights because, a lot of people, especially younger people who are getting into houseplants, don't necessarily have, like, a lovely massive floor to ceiling south facing outlook.
I think that's the thing. I think that a lot of times, a lot of people struggle with light levels. Like, their perception of light levels is so varied, because it's this thing that we think of, and we can all make our own idea of it. I think we have a lot of emails in where people send me pictures, and I'll say, that plant, as soon as I see it, that's not had enough light. And they'll say, no, it's got direct light. And I'll say, show me, like, pan out, show me where it is. And this one time, it was like, it was like a really high level window, and the plant was on the floor under it, so it wouldn't get any light. And I was like, no, that's not direct light. So I think it's like educating people on what light levels are, because once you know that, and then but then you need to know what your plant needs. But I think that it's that people think, oh, it's bright enough in here for me to read a book. That's bright light. It's like, no, like, it needs to be direct. You need to, it needs to be on the plant. So I think that is something. And I think, obviously, as you said, especially in cities, in London, you might not have a space. You might have just one window. And so it's just kind of knowing that if it's not bright enough, don't get succulents or cacti. You need to then be thinking of, like, oh, if you have got one, maybe like a Sansevieria, you're going to get a snake plant, because then it can deal with lower levels of light. So I think most people think that they're like plant killers, but actually it's the fact that they've just don't know the care for that plant. So if you knew before you bought the plant that, oh, I've actually got a shady room, you'd go out looking for shady plants and you'd have harmony, rather than trying to put an echeveria there and it stretches looking for the light. So I think that's the number one thing that I think that would help people keep their plants alive, is just to know that in every circumstance, you're just trying to emulate the plant's needs. It's not where you need the plant to be. You need to, like, reverse it and work out, like, what does the plant need, and can I give it that in my home? Exactly.
And those echeverias, I mean, they go like fireworks. They just stretch out, and people think that's actually what they are meant to look like. And you're like, no, that's not. They're not meant to be, looking like something out of a Dr. Seuss book. They're meant to be a compact rosette. I mean, you can kind of sometimes recover those, though.
Deheading. It depends on how far gone.
Bad it is.
Yeah, but I think I always feel bad because people go, look at my plant, it's grown so much, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to have to tell you that shouldn't look like that. So it's definitely it is one of those hard ones. And I always say to people, if it's stretch, if it's smaller at the top, if it's a lighter colour, then it's not getting enough light, and then that means that, like, you won't make the mistake with others. Because I think lots of people get that fear of failure. Like, oh no, I'm a bad plant parent, I'm going to give up now. And it's like, no, because with every mistake you've made, you've learned a lesson, which means that you can keep another one alive or not put a succulent in the corner. So I definitely always say that everything's a learning experience.
Exactly. And, the great thing is you can, as you say, chop the head off that Echeveria, and succulent cuttings can just sit on a shelf for weeks. I mean, I've had things that have been on. I had some jade plant cuttings that were literally on a shelf for months. They were fine.
Yeah.
So as long as you're not sort of throwing too much water at them, you can oftentimes fix these problems. But it is a bit depressing when somebody's like thinks that's the natural shape of the plant. I feel that's where the education comes in, and also I think we've got to talk more about substrate though, because that is another key thing where you get this issue of this. They leave it in the no drainage pot, and then it's a giant sump. And those roots, they like lots of air around them, don't they?
Yeah.
Do you have a secret recipe for substrates? What do you tend to use?
It's not a secret. We do share it, but we do mix up our own soil. I do like pumice. Very, very hard to come by at the moment. Very, very expensive, like insanely. So if anyone's hearing this and they look up online and they're like, what? Like, yeah. But I do really like pumice. I know, like, if you are like hardcore with cacti, you will just use pumice. You won't use anything else. But I find like with like moving, like we would never be able to like post things out with just pumice. It'll go everywhere. It's also very expensive, but so we mix ours up. So we mix ours up with coir, and we do have like some grit, and then we have like some just light kind of topsoil, and kind of mix it in to make a more soily kind of base, but with lovely drainage for it, and it's all obviously peat free. So yeah, that's definitely what we use. So I think we have used many different ones over the year, but that's usually what we use, and we put John Ennis in there as the number 2 peat free for us to have that kind of soil base, but that's ours. But I know that obviously it can be such a mixture. Some people will use like more grit, or they'll use perlite, or use vermiculite. Like there's so many different things you can add. And
of course we must mention the classic substrate ingredient, cat litter.
Yes,
I mean that's really popular. I mean you got to be choosing the right cat litter though.
Yeah,
I have tried to do this where you go to the supermarket and I'm looking for the right cat litter. I'm like, I've got no idea. The cat litter's made out of so many different things. You don't want the one made out of wood pellets, or the one made out of like gel granules. I don't even know what that is. It's the molar clay one apparently. There's a pumice substitute, but I've
always seen on the cactus like forums they always share actual links to ones that work. So I've always seen
there are a couple of brands that people prefer, but it's a minefield. It is a minefield. But I think the main thing is, as you say, you just test it out. Get the pot, put some substrate in it, and run some water through it, and see how quickly it drains through. If it doesn't drain through quickly, you're going to put your plant under a lot of stress. So whatever you use, it's just got to be that free draining stuff. I love pumice as well, but as you say, it's, for some reason in this country, it's really, I guess we don't have any volcanoes. I'm going outside my comfort zone here.
No, you're right. It's like Portugal, I think they mine for it, and there's somewhere else. But yeah, it's in Europe. There's like 2 countries in Europe, but that's why we don't actually have anywhere here. It's all imported.
And do you find that when you're dealing with people buying cacti, that people want to kind of want your wisdom when they come in the shop? Are they like, I don't know what to buy? Or do people oftentimes just see something and absolutely fall in love with it? I know you've got some amazing specimens in the shop.
I haven't worked in the shop for a while, but I'll talk about when I was in there every single day for 6 weeks. It was like a lot of people, you would have people come in saying, show me a plant to buy. And I would always say, just have a look at them, because they all have, like, especially with cacti, I find they've got such great character. I was like, they'll be able to speak to you. You'll be able to be like, actually, there's something about that one, and they've got such amazing geometric design, and it's just incredible. I just think they're incredible because of it. But you do have that mixture, but then you do have a lot of people come in and they'll potter around, and then they'll get the courage to be like, I've got a question, and they're like, I'm like, it's fine for you just to ask. So I think it's really nice that what I felt when I first opened the shop is that I had created, as you were saying, you wanted a place to speak to people. I had created this hub where people could come in and show me their pictures. I'd be like, I know you've got pictures on your phone, just show me. And they'd be like, you really want to see them? Like hundreds of pictures of their plants. And I think one thing, especially with cacti, is like identifying them. It's so hard because there's so many different species. And if you don't have any idea of the genus, it's so hard to name. So I think we have a lot of people asking for IDs because obviously then you'll know like more information about your plant and being able to care them for you. But you have like a mixture of people that come in that are like hardcore like cactus fans and come in for either like to just talk plants or to get advice. So yeah, it's really nice having a mixture of like first time buyers as well as people that are really into the game.
Yeah, and I find when you start talking to people, you've got to sort of weigh up, okay, if they start throwing these Latin names out like ninja stars, you're like, okay, they know what they're talking about, as opposed to the person who goes, that green blobby thing over there. Like, you know, you find the level. But you're right, though. Cacti, there are so many of them. And, you know, oftentimes with houseplants, usually I can give a pretty confident ID, but often with cacti, I'm like, I mean, aside from things that I, know quite well and grow myself, it does get tough. And also there's changes as well, which is another problem, where something's changed name and some of the names are unpronounceable as well.
I feel like now there's things that we know so well, like calathea, we know it by that name. Yeah. Sorry, I'm still calling it. Like, that's it. I'm not going to change it over. Like, so there's so many things now where it's like, okay, that's what it is. But everybody else in the world still calls it by its old name. And it's like the more they run the DNA and they're like, oh, actually, no, it doesn't belong to that family. It just keeps changing. So it's really hard to keep up with. And then if you do call it by its new name, everybody's like, what plant are you talking about? What is that?
If you say Gupertia rather than Calathea, it's like, who? The what now? So yeah, it is tricky, and I mean, some of the new names are just like, I mean, I still don't know how to spell Gupertia because I have to Google it every single time.
E and the
I don't know, but anyway, it is tough. And I think with cacti, one of the things I do like is the fact that you've got such a range of sizes. Yeah. Is it a situation now where people maybe have small flats, aren't necessarily buying the huge ones anymore, or do people still in cacti still want that statement plant like you were talking about for houseplants?
I think it's a mixture of like, I think with the city you can have that lovely collection on your windowsill, which I think is so cute, and you can nurture them and grow and have a growing collection in a small space. But I think the statement ones are still really wanted, but because of Brexit, it's really hard to get them in. Yeah, so you'll find now there's a huge shortage of like large cacti, and also it's Brexit and also demand. Like, they can take up to 40 years to get these like 6-foot cacti. Everybody, we've been riding this wave for the last 6 years. So obviously if all of them have sold now, we're going to have to wait another 30 odd years, 35 to 40 years until they're grown. So then now we've just got this huge hole where it's like people want them, but there's nowhere to get them from. So if you have got a large cactus, you need to just look after that, like, because it's so hard to come by, and people have spent a lot of time nurturing them. So I feel like now, because of that, and people have just accepted that, people have now gone back to like, okay, I'm going to now say in 20 years' time and be proud of this huge cactus that I've grown, and say like I did that myself, rather than buying it big.
Yeah, I think there's something in that, and it's a really joyous thing when you can grow something. The first time something flowers, it's just, or produces a little baby, it's a real thrill. It's a real thrill. And but we do. I mean, I have to always say whenever I do a talk or a podcast that there are some disasters along the way. Things do die in my care, as they like to say these days. I mean, it happens. And particularly with cacti, I think sometimes at the end of winter you can get that moment where it's like you start watering again and you realise that's not sleeping, that's dead, which is a really depressing moment. But it happens to the best of us, doesn't it?
I think people need to remember that they are living things. So as much as we can care for them, sometimes it's just their time to go. That's one thing. And also, we're allowed to mess up. Like, I tell people all the time and they go, Gynelle, you won't believe it, I've killed a cactus. I've killed loads. Like, it's fine. Like, it happens. You might be really busy, you forgot to water that one over here, or scorching. Or even this summer I had like a lovely Echinocactus grissona, a large one actually. It's quite sad. It's like 25 years old, and I was like, it's summertime, and I put it outside and I gave it a huge water. But you know what this weather's like here? Like, it can be really hot one second and then cold the next, and it literally, I just rotted it, and I was so sad. I was like, I got too excited thinking that we were in the full-blown summer, but we weren't quite there yet. And also, I think it might have been shock because it had been, you know, in a cool, like, place inside, and then we had this, so we all make mistakes. And I think it's also, I think it's very comforting when people that are seen as like these plant people actually can say, yeah, it happens to all of us. I'm not going to stand here and say, no, I don't kill any of my plants, because it definitely happens. But we just learn from it every time, like, and then go, oh, won't do that again.
Well, the mistake I've made in the past is putting cacti on the compost heap, and you pay for that, because then when you know, months later when you're like turning your compost and you get like spiked from beyond the grave. I mean, it's just that is an awful experience. I've learned not to do that with anything that's too spiky, because those spikes, they stick around. Yeah. They don't break down in the same way as other plant material. You must have had some war tales of being attacked by your... Or not attacked, but, you know... Well, maybe you're not as clumsy as... I think I fell into something when I was in your shop. I'm clumsy. So, any advice on what to do if you do get...
Spines.
Literally pricked?
I feel like... I remember once, it's like learning to stop yourself having the reflex of catching things when they drop. Oh, that's the one thing that I've had to rewire my brain, which is quite hard. I'd have it where something would go, and you're like, and you've caught it in your hand. With spines, I think the bigger they are, the easier it is, because you can see it usually to get out. It's when you've got like, if you've got the glochids from a puntia, or like a, what do we call them, bunny ear cactus, where they're tiny little like hairs. Those ones I'd use sellotape to pull them out, and then just kind of just deal with it. The itchiness will go after a while. The more you itch, the more it makes it itchy. With the larger ones, if it is spines, just either you can like push them out, which I find, like, if you get it quickly, if your skin hasn't like kind of got a callus over, you could push them out. If not, it's like, you know, you use like a splinter, you need to kind of get it out there. But I recently had one in my finger, and I'm used to them, so I can have some on my arm and not even feel it anymore, and then be like, oh, look, they're there. It's been there about 2 days. But the one in my finger hurt so much, and it was there for like 2 weeks. I couldn't get out. And it's so bad that now my son constantly talks about, I think I've got a cactus spine in my arm. I'm like, no, you haven't. Like, because he's just so used to me talking about it for that whole 2 weeks, going, I can't get this cactus spine out of my finger. But that's the worst I've had. But usually, if it's just a normal surface one, you can usually push it out, or you can like use the tweezers to take them out.
Yeah. I mean, when I was researching my book, I read a lot of stuff, academic papers on, doctors writing academic papers on treatment of getting rid of cactus spines, and the number of different solutions they had for getting the spines out was amazing.
Really?
But some of the injuries were eye-watering. You just thought, gosh, this poor person who's like really has fallen, or children falling into patches of cacti. It's just horrendous. Do not do that.
I could not imagine that. I've had people come into the store and tell me that, from like, and it stays with them. Like, they're like, as a child I fell into a cactus. Yes, and you're just like, I could imagine, like, if you had, I find it hard with just one in my finger, let alone like if you're covered on your body trying to get them out. But I haven't had any huge accidents. I've just had, like, if I like walk into one and it gets me, or I found that in the greenhouse I'd have to tie my hair up because I have like I'll get stuck with the hanging ones. That's the one thing that I always forget when I go in there. I'm like, oops. So I always try and tie hair up when I'm going in the greenhouse, because and then also in clothes as well, they'll catch on you. So I've had one before on my clothes, and I sat down and it's just like attached to the side of me. So I mean, it's a dangerous job.
The perils of the job. Well, I mean, I guess the danger zone is when you're repotting. I mean, I just usually like wrap it in something, but there's no easy way to do it. Some of those spines are just so able to penetrate.
I use, I make like a noose out of like paper, so you can like just kind of, or you can use, I don't know, any piece of cloth, so that you're kind of holding it away, not actually having to touch it. And then I find also, I must admit, like I don't wear gloves when I repot, but like it's a lot to do with like the pressure points of like balancing it in a certain way that it's not going to get you. But there are some cacti where it's too spiky that it's very lethal. But me and Daisy were talking today, like the agaves are probably the worst.
Oh yeah,
because that's just like, that feels like you're just being punctured. It's just, they're so sharp and so long and thick. They're probably the most painful.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. They are absolutely lethal. In fact, I've seen on the Isle of Wight, where there's a lot of agaves, they have corks on the spikes to stop people hurting themselves, because I imagine that's, they don't want to be sued by somebody who's had their eye poked out by one of these things. But they are lethal. I mean, I guess you can understand why the plant's doing it. They don't want to be eaten by herbivores in the wild, and it's very sensible. But it is a peril of being involved in cacti and succulents, unfortunately. But I think the benefits outweigh the problems we're having. I have run out of questions to ask you. I don't know if there's anything my audience wants to ask before we go, or if I shall just wrap up. If you've got a question, Emily, or I'm putting you on the spot here.
Oh, I've never done this, but I know you can.
Yeah, you can do it. You can get a little paintbrush and just, you can make it as complicated or as simple as you like, but you could just get a paintbrush and move pollen from one flower to another or between two plants, and then just watch out for the seed pod, which will hopefully develop, and then harvest the seed. The cactus seed is like really tiny really on the whole, so that's the downside. But just play around with it. It's really fun, and most cacti are quite easy to grow from seed, so it's worth having a go. Just make sure that you're not that other pollinators aren't coming in and sort of like getting in the way of what you're trying to do. But it's a fun thing to do. It's really fun. You just end up with an awful lot of cacti when you grow them from seed. That's the only thing, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but you get an awful lot of plants. I mean, why is that a problem? Of course it's not a problem. You've got friends and family, they would all love to have a cactus.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining me this evening, and thank you to my guest Gynelle. And it's the gloaming is coming on here at Hampton Court. It's all looking rather charming. So enjoy the rest of the show, and thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to my guest Gynelle Leon and to Hampton Court for hosting the show this year. I also got the chance to meet up with the wonderful drag queen gardener who was also doing a podcast recording at the show and is magnificent. So do check out the Drag Queen Gardener. Daisy Desire is dragqueen_gardener on Instagram. And now time for question of the week. This one comes from Megan and it concerns some sticky drops on a Philodendron Paraiso Verde. And Megan immediately thought that the sticky drops on those leaves were caused by honeydew. Now, honeydew I always think sounds a lot nicer than it actually is. I'm thinking of delicious honeydew melon, I guess, but actually it's a secretion. The word secretion is just great to start with. It's a secretion of various houseplant pests that suck sap out of our plants, namely things like aphids and scale insects. It comes out of their anus and they basically, and it kind of is fired. Sorry, this is too much information maybe, but basically they fire this honeydew out of their bottom area when they go to suck the sap of a plant. When we say sap, we're talking about the phloem. This is the botanical term for it that is in the plant's leaves. And obviously that contains water, but it also contains sugars and nitrogen. And some of that has to be jettisoned, and that's where the honeydew comes in. So it's a sugary excretion. I'll put a link in the show notes to an article all about honeydew, which you might find interesting. What then happens is that ants in particular are attracted to the honeydew because they want those sugars, so they will then act like a farmer of these insects, protecting them and ensuring that they have a supply of honeydew to harvest for themselves. So yes, they're very clever. And if you leave the honeydew in situ for a while, you may also find you get this black powdery stuff on top of it, and that is sooty mould that builds up on the honeydew. It gets worse. So yeah, you may also see that black powdery stuff. Look out for that. That you'll probably find when you start wiping that away that it's embedded on the very sticky honeydew below. But when you see honeydew on leaves, it can be confusing because oftentimes, particularly if you've got a bit of a jungly environment at home, you know, I'm speaking to somebody who probably has got a jungly environment, given you're listening to this podcast, you may find that you see the honeydew on one plant, but actually it's dropping from pests on another plant overhead. You might also spot, if your plant's next to a window, the window getting sticky. Sometimes it's not that easy to spot. So Megan's wondering if this sticky stuff is indeed honeydew, but looking around for pests is at a loss to find any pests on these particular plants, even though she is, as all good On the Ledge listeners are, using a hand lens. So Megan is flummoxed what could be causing this if there aren't any sap-sucking pests around. Megan's also found sticky drops on other philodendrons, including the delightful Ring of Fire. It does seem strange because, as Megan has shown me in the pictures, she's also got various marks on the leaves that do look like there could be some pest involved. Paler marks, circles on the leaves, which do look indicative of some kind of pest damage. My main advice, Megan, would be just to keep an eye on your plants. Keep roaming around with that hand lens. Keep looking for the pests, because sometimes they can migrate around and you're not necessarily sure where they were. The plant could sometimes grow past them, but it does certainly look to me like there might have been some kind of pest infestation, whether historic or current, on your plants. There is also the possibility of the extra floral nectary. What on earth is that? We call it EFN for short. I'm hoping to do a whole podcast episode for the Leaf Botany series on these strange things, but the clue's in the name. They're nectaries, they produce nectar, but they're not connected to plants. They're extra floral, so they're usually found somewhere on the leaf, often at the very base of the leaf or along the midrib of the plant. It varies from species to species. So why would a plant be producing nectar unconnected to the flower, the whole flowering process and the process of pollination? Well, as we know, many plants do have these beneficial relationships with various creatures, and botanists think that these extrafloral nectaries can help to attract things like ants, which will then protect the plant from other pests. So it's a kind of a mutually beneficial relationship. Now, extrafloral nectaries generally don't occur a lot in the Araceae family. However, they are common in the genus Philodendron. I will post a link to an academic paper from the Botanical Journal of the Linnaean Society entitled Extrafloral Nectaries in Philodendron Distribution and Structure, which may be of interest to some of you who want to go deeper into this subject. I would be very surprised if those plants you have listed, Megan, are not all known for extrafloral nectaries. So it could well be that the sticky drops you're seeing are coming from those extrafloral nectaries. So I would say it's not something to hugely worry about. The marks on the leaves may be historic pest damage or a sign of some other kind of problem, so it's worth keeping an eye on that. But in terms of the sticky stuff, you can just wash it away. You might need to use a bit of horticultural soap spray to remove it, because obviously it's sticky, it does stick. But in and of itself, it's not going to cause any problems to your plant. If it's outside or you put it outside for summer, you may find that you do attract ants. So that's something worth bearing in mind. As I say, I'm hoping to do a whole episode on extrafloral nectaries in an upcoming show in the autumn. So hopefully we will learn more then. But do check out the show notes for links to that paper and also some more information about the delights of honeydew. I hope that helps, Megan. And if you've got a question for On The Ledge, drop me a line. ontheledgepodcast@gmail.com. That's all for this week's show, and I will be back next Friday. I hope you will join me then for the final show before my little summer break. Have a fabulous week. Bye! The music you heard in this episode was Roll Jordan Roll by the Joy Drops, The Road We Used to Travel When We Were Young by Komiku, and Part 8 by Jazar. All tracks are licensed under Creative Commons. Visit the show notes for details.